Have you ever stayed with someone knowing, deep down, that something wasn't right? You wake beside them in the stillness of the night and feel the warmth of their body near yours, yet inside you feel like you are lying alone. The silence is heavy, not peaceful, and you catch yourself wondering when love stopped feeling like home and started feeling like a burden. It's a quiet truth you rarely speak aloud, that sometimes the person closest to you can feel impossibly distant, like two stars orbiting the same sky but never touching. The strange thing is, incompatibility rarely arrives with a loud announcement. It does not break down your door or crash into your life in an obvious storm. It slips in quietly, like water through cracks in the wall. At first, you barely notice. You laugh at different things, you dream in different directions, and you think to yourself that love is about compromise. But with each passing day, the small fractures deepen. You begin to feel like a key being forced into the wrong lock, close enough to fit, but never able to turn. Consider the rivers. Two streams may begin close together, running side by side. For a while, it seems as though they are destined to merge, flowing as one, but over time, their paths diverge. One bends toward the mountains, the other toward the sea. The further they travel, the more impossible reunion becomes. That is what incompatibility feels like. Not always a war, not always chaos, but a slow, irreversible separation of souls that once believed they were meant to walk together. Psychology reminds us that human beings have an extraordinary ability to adapt, even when it harms them. Studies on cognitive dissonance show that when reality doesn't match our hopes, we twist our perception to reduce the discomfort. You tell yourself it isn't so bad, that love is supposed to be difficult, that no relationship is perfect. You cling to the moments of comfort, like a starving person holding crumbs, ignoring the emptiness growing louder inside. And yet, your nervous system knows, your body feels it. Incompatibility weighs on you like carrying a heavy stone each day, pressing into your chest until even breathing feels like effort. This is the silent weight of wrong love. It does not roar, but it suffocates. It does not always break you in one clean strike, but instead wears you down slowly, like a tide that erodes the shore grain by grain. You don't even notice how much of yourself you've lost until one day you no longer recognize the reflection staring back at you. And so the question lingers, how do you know when love has become a cage instead of a sanctuary? How do you recognize when two souls, despite their history, are no longer meant to walk the same path? The answer lies in the signs we often ignore, the subtle truths that whisper long before the final goodbye. These are the 7 signs of an incompatible relationship, and once you see them clearly, you can no longer unsee them. Have you ever wondered why you are drawn to certain people, even when they are not good for you? It feels less like a conscious choice and more like gravity, pulling you toward what is familiar rather than what is healthy. That pull, invisible yet relentless, begins in childhood, long before you ever learn to call it love. Picture a child standing in the hallway, small hands pressed against the cool wall as muffled voices rise from the room beyond. The parents argue, their words sharp, their silences sharper. The child does not understand every word, but the feeling is unmistakable. Love is unstable. Love is loud. Love means tiptoeing carefully to avoid the storm. In that moment, without knowing it, the child's compass of compatibility is carved. They learn to equate closeness with chaos, to confuse safety with tension. Years later, when they meet someone whose presence feels like fire rather than warmth, their body remembers the script and whispers, "This is familiar. This must be love." Psychologists call this the shaping of attachment patterns. Neuroscience shows that the developing brain wires itself around early relationships. If approval was given only when you performed, you grow into an adult who chases validation instead of genuine connection. If affection was unpredictable, you may mistake volatility for passion. The nervous system, trained to survive instability, finds comfort in repetition, even when that repetition hurts. It is as if each child plants a secret garden inside themselves, watered not by choice, but by the love they receive. Some gardens grow lush with trust, patience, and care. Others grow thorned and tangled, filled with weeds of neglect, criticism, or absence. And when you step into adulthood, you unconsciously search for someone whose footsteps will not disturb the soil of that garden, even if it is barren. This is why people so often confuse compatibility with comfort. Comfort is simply what you have known the longest, and if what you have known is pain, then pain will feel like home. The tragedy is that a child's unmet needs do not disappear. They linger, waiting for fulfillment. You may grow into an adult who longs for acceptance, yet chooses partners who mirror the very dismissiveness that once wounded you. You may yearn for safety, yet find yourself drawn to those who replicate chaos. Like a compass misaligned, pointing not north but back toward old wounds, your heart follows paths that seem inevitable. This is where the story of incompatibility begins, not in adulthood, not in the first argument with a lover, but in the unspoken lessons of childhood. And unless you learn to see those lessons for what they are, you carry them into every bond you form, mistaking the repetition of suffering for destiny. But masks built in childhood eventually reveal their cracks. What begins as innocent conditioning will one day manifest in the way you love, the way you cling, the way you endure. And that is where the next chapter unfolds how incompatibility hides in plain sight, disguised in the masks we wear as adults. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to pretend that everything is fine, even when something inside you quietly aches? You smile at the dinner table, you nod along at stories you don't truly find amusing, and you laugh at jokes that never touch your heart. It is not that you are dishonest, it is that you have learned the art of masking, of accommodating, of bending, of wearing a face that convinces the world, and sometimes even yourself, that love is alive when in truth it is only surviving. This is how incompatibility hides in adulthood. It doesn't come dressed as a catastrophe. It doesn't always arrive with betrayal or cruelty. Instead, it disguises itself as tolerance, as endurance, as compromise stretched so thin it becomes silence. You sit beside your partner, both staring at the same horizon, yet one of you sees mountains and the other sees the sea. You make plans together, but the dreams are mismatched. One imagines a quiet life, the other longs for endless adventure. On the surface, it looks like togetherness. Beneath it, two puzzle pieces are being forced together, edges grinding, shapes refusing to align. Neuroscience tells us that the brain seeks patterns of familiarity. It rewards you with dopamine when you conform to what feels expected, even if that expectation suffocates you. And so you adapt. You laugh when you don't want to. You agree when your soul says no. You build a home with walls that look steady, but the foundation trembles like a house built on uneven ground. The cracks are subtle. A sigh left unheard, a kiss that feels rehearsed, an intimacy that feels like duty rather than desire. The mask is meant to protect, but it always costs something. You begin to lose yourself inside it. The voice in your chest that once spoke freely now whispers only in private moments. You catch glimpses of who you used to be in the reflection of a window, in the quiet drive home, and you wonder when you became an actor in your own life. The mask was supposed to hold the relationship together, yet it leaves you lonelier than if you had been alone. Psychologists describe this as emotional incongruence, the gap between what you feel and what you show. It breeds resentment, exhaustion, even illness, as your nervous system carries the weight of unspoken truths. And the tragedy is that incompatibility rarely shouts. It does not stand up and announce its presence. It whispers through missed connections, through unshared laughter, through the growing distance between two people, who once believed they were one. This is the mask of adulthood, a fragile shield against the truth that love, when incompatible, becomes a slow erosion. But masks can only hide so much before the cracks appear, and when they do, you begin to see that what you thought was love may instead be the shadow of something deeper, a reflection of the very patterns your childhood taught you to endure. It is here that psychology steps in to explain why your brain clings to the familiar, even when the familiar quietly destroys you. Why is it that you can meet someone who seems perfect on paper, who shares your interests, laughs at your favorite jokes, even mirrors your habits, and yet something inside you still feels off? Compatibility, as science reminds us, is rarely about surface similarities. It is not about liking the same music, ordering the same coffee, or quoting the same movies. True compatibility lies deeper, buried in the rhythms of your nervous system, in the invisible ways two minds regulate or destabilize each other. Attachment theory offers the first lens. From childhood, you develop a style of bonding secure, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, and this style follows you into adulthood like a shadow. If you are anxious, you crave closeness. If you are avoidant, you crave distance. When two people lock into opposing patterns, their relationship becomes less a partnership and more a cycle one pursues. The other retreats, both exhausting themselves in the process. Neuroscience shows that this dance activates stress circuits in the brain, flooding your body with cortisol, as though love itself has become a battlefield. John Gottman, one of the most influential researchers on marriage and compatibility, discovered that it isn't conflict itself that destroys relationships, but how couples handle it. In his studies, couples who survived and thrived were not the ones who avoided arguments, but the ones who managed to repair the softening after the storm. Those who fell apart weren't necessarily the ones who shouted the loudest, but the ones who carried contempt like a poison, letting it seep into every word and silence. Compatibility, then, is less about never clashing and more about whether your nervous systems can return to harmony after rupture. Your brain, however, has its own tricks. It rewards familiarity, even when familiarity is unhealthy. Studies show that people often confuse the rush of recognition with the feeling of rightness. If you grew up in chaos, chaos will feel strangely comforting, even as it tears you apart. Dopamine fires not because the relationship is good, but because it is familiar, and your brain, desperate for predictability, would rather choose the known pain than risk the unknown. Imagine two instruments playing side by side. If they are tuned to the same key, the sound resonates, filling the room with harmony. But if one is even slightly off, every note becomes discordant, no matter how passionately the music is played. This is the essence of psychological fit, not whether you enjoy the same hobbies, but whether your nervous systems, your values, your ways of repairing and loving can create music instead of noise. And when the music falters, when your body begins to register the misfit, even before your mind admits it, the cost is not just conflict, but erosion, a steady depletion of peace, trust, and joy. This is the point where incompatibility begins to take on its darker form, not just as a mismatch, but as a shadow that slowly cages the soul. Have you ever felt lonelier lying beside someone than when you were completely alone? It is a strange, almost surreal kind of emptiness to reach across the sheets and find a body there, yet no soul meeting yours. You lie together, night after night, but it feels as though you are separated by galaxies. Their breath is near, but their presence is distant, and in that distance, a quiet despair begins to bloom. Incompatibility, left unacknowledged, does not simply linger, it corrodes. At first, it wears away at the edges of your joy, the unshared laughter, the mismatched silences, the absence of being truly seen. But over time, it begins to erode something deeper, your sense of self. You start to wonder if perhaps you are asking for too much. You question whether intimacy was ever supposed to feel easy, whether love was meant to leave you drained instead of nourished. Like pouring water into a vessel riddled with holes, you give and give, only to watch your efforts seep away, uncontained, unreciprocated. Psychology calls this the slow fracture of self-worth. When needs go unmet for long enough, your nervous system interprets the rejection as a reflection of your value. Studies on emotional neglect show how even subtle dismissals, a shrug, an eye roll, a silence that lingers too long, can activate the same regions of the brain that register physical pain. You begin to feel small, invisible, like a shadow in your own home. The paradox is cruel. The more incompatible the bond, the harder you cling to it, believing that if you can just love harder, bend further, sacrifice more, you will finally be enough. But the harder you cling, the more you vanish inside it. Think of a bird trapped inside a cage with open bars. Freedom is inches away, yet it paces back and forth, convinced it cannot leave. That is what incompatibility does. It convinces you that staying is safer than facing the unknown, that endurance is nobler than liberation. And so you remain, wings folded, heart muted, spirit confined. The haunting truth is that love, when misaligned, becomes less of a sanctuary and more of a silent prison. You are not destroyed in one dramatic collapse, but through countless small erosions. A smile that no longer reaches your eyes. A kiss that feels rehearsed. A dream you stop mentioning because you know it will not be understood. Each moment chips away at who you are until you wake one day to find that you are still alive, but not fully living. This is the shadow of incompatibility. Not rage, not betrayal, but quiet suffocation. And as the walls close in, you begin to wonder whether it is love at all, or simply the fear of losing what was never truly yours. Yet society whispers that staying is strength, that endurance is virtue. And so the shadow deepens, leading us into the illusions of culture that keep so many bound to the wrong loves. Have you ever wondered why it feels easier to stay in the wrong relationship than to walk away from it? It is not just fear of loneliness that binds you. It is the weight of stories told long before you were born, myths, traditions, and cultural scripts that whisper in your ear, teaching you that endurance is love and leaving is failure. From the time you were young, you absorbed the phrases, "Love conquers all." Relationships are supposed to be hard. Better to have someone than no one. They sound noble, almost poetic, but beneath their surface lies a quiet chain, fastening you to bonds that starve your spirit. Consider the films you grew up with, the novels, the songs. They glorified sacrifice, celebrated the couple that stayed together despite endless dysfunction, praised the one who waited, tolerated, forgave beyond reason. The message was clear: the greatest love stories are not the ones that nourish, but the ones that survive. And so, when you find yourself in a relationship that drains you, you don't see it as incompatibility, you see it as your duty to endure. You wear exhaustion like a badge of honor, as though bleeding for love proves that your heart is pure. Psychology calls this internalized conditioning. Your mind does not form its beliefs in isolation. It absorbs them through repetition, through cultural reward systems that praise self-sacrifice over authenticity. Studies in social conformity show that humans fear standing outside the group more than they fear personal suffering, so you stay. You play the role of the loyal partner, even when loyalty feels like betrayal to yourself. You silence the voice that says, "This is not right," because society taught you that silence is virtue, that leaving means you were weak, impatient, unloving. But this narrative is a mirage. A garden left in drought cannot bloom simply because you believe in its potential. A mask forced over a broken bond does not turn it into truth. Endurance without harmony does not create love, it only creates shadows. And yet, the cultural myth persists, that love is proven by how much pain you are willing to withstand. This myth keeps countless souls locked in quiet prisons, their lives reduced not by cruelty, but by the subtle weight of expectation. Philosophers have long argued that society values stability more than freedom, tradition more than authenticity. And so, even in your most private moments, you may find yourself questioning whether your unhappiness is a flaw in you, rather than a symptom of the cage you were handed. But deep inside, something knows. Something aches for a different truth, a truth where love does not demand the sacrifice of self, but the recognition of it. And yet, when those cultural myths tighten their grip, the cost begins to show. The longer you stay in what diminishes you, the more your heart bends beneath the weight. And this leads to the heaviest toll of all the emotional consequences that shape your soul in silence. What does it do to you when you stay in a love that was never meant to hold you? At first, the cost seems small. A missed laugh, a dream left unspoken, a silence that lingers longer than it should. But over time, those small costs accumulate and the weight becomes unbearable. You do not notice it all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water rising in a room while you convince yourself you can still breathe. Until one day, you realize you have been drowning for years. Incompatibility does not only steal joy from the present, it reshapes your very sense of self. You begin to doubt your worth. You tell yourself that if you were easier to love, things would feel different. Neuroscience shows that repeated emotional invalidation rewires the brain's pathways, heightening sensitivity to rejection, fueling anxiety, and feeding depressive loops. What was once a single unmet need becomes a chorus of self-criticism echoing in your mind. I am too much. I am not enough. I am unlovable. Picture a flower planted in the wrong soil. It bends toward the light. It stretches. It reaches, but the nutrients it needs never arrive. Slowly, its colors fade, its petals droop, and the life within it begins to wither. That is what happens to you in an incompatible relationship. Your spirit tries to bloom, but the environment starves it. Every attempt at intimacy feels forced, mechanical, more performance than presence. Love becomes something you act out, rather than something you experience. Psychologists speak of identity erosion, the phenomenon where constant self-denial in relationships erodes not just happiness, but the very clarity of who you are. You forget what you love, what excites you, what makes your soul feel alive, because so much of your energy is consumed by trying to fit into a bond that was never meant for you. You are not simply delaying happiness. You are actively diminishing yourself. It is like playing a song on the wrong instrument. The notes are there, but the sound is broken, hollow, never quite what it was meant to be. And yet, perhaps the most haunting consequence is loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being unseen while lying beside someone. That loneliness cuts deeper than solitude because it reminds you that love is present in name, but absent in truth. Research shows that people in high conflict or emotionally barren relationships report lower well-being than those who are single. The wrong love is not neutral, it is toxic to the psyche, corroding your peace day by day. This is the long shadow of incompatibility. Anxiety woven into your nights, depression quietly stalking your mornings, a broken self-identity that no longer remembers the shape of freedom. And as that shadow lengthens, you begin to realize that the cost of staying is not simply wasted time, it is the slow erasure of your soul. But even in the heaviest shadow, a question flickers like a fragile light. If staying drains you, could leaving restore you? This is where the path turns toward the possibility of healing and the courage to begin again. What does it mean to reclaim yourself after years of bending, shrinking, or silencing who you are? Healing does not arrive with sudden fireworks, nor does it demand that you walk away overnight. It begins in quieter ways, in the moments when you stop forcing what does not fit and start listening to the voice inside you that has been whispering all along. That voice, though buried, still knows what peace feels like. It still remembers what it means to be whole. Imagine two rivers that have been straining to merge, colliding against each other, turbulent and restless. The healing begins not by pushing harder, but by letting them flow in their natural directions. To reclaim yourself is to honor the truth of your own current, to stop fighting against what your soul already knows. For years, you may have poured energy into making the wrong bond feel right, but the moment you pause, you realize that your worth was never dependent on whether someone else could hold it. Psychology shows us that awareness is the first key. Understanding your attachment style, whether anxious, avoidant, or secure, can unmask the patterns that keep you repeating old wounds. Neuroscience reminds us that the brain is not fixed. Through reflection and new choices, your neural pathways reshape. Each boundary you set, each time you refuse to betray yourself for the sake of false harmony, you are literally rewiring your brain toward resilience and self-trust. Healing is not about hardening, it is about softening into truth. It is shadow work turning to face the parts of yourself you once rejected, the loneliness you tried to escape, the fears you tried to hide. Loneliness, when reframed, is not an enemy, but a teacher. In solitude, you rediscover what makes your spirit alive, what nourishes you, like sunlight on a neglected garden. It is in these quiet hours, free from performance, that you begin to remember yourself. Setting boundaries is not about pushing others away, but about drawing a sacred circle around your soul. It says, "This is where I end, and this is where I begin." It is not cruelty, but clarity. And in that clarity, you learn that love is not proven by sacrifice, but by freedom. The freedom to grow without fear, the freedom to be seen without disguise. The path forward is not simple, and it is not without pain. But each step away from forcing the wrong love is a step back into yourself. You realize that healing is not about fixing what is broken between two people, but about mending the fracture within. You stop asking, "How can I make this work?" and begin asking, "How can I return to myself?" And when you do, something shifts. The mask falls, the weight lifts, and you understand what was hidden all along. That incompatibility is not the end of your story, but the beginning of a truer one. And from here, the journey moves toward a deeper truth, not just psychological, but philosophical, about what it means to live and love authentically. The opposite of love is not hate, but living beside someone who cannot truly meet your soul. Hate still burns with recognition, but indifference inside intimacy is a colder death. It is the silence that stretches between two people who once touched deeply, but now pass each other like strangers in their own home. And that silence, heavy and invisible, becomes the heaviest weight you will ever carry. Nietzsche once wrote that what we need most in life is not comfort, but clarity. The courage to face truth without disguise. Incompatibility is not a condemnation of your worth, nor a failure stamped on your story. It is clarity. It is the universe whispering that two rivers were never meant to merge, no matter how desperately you tried to bend their course. You mistake it for loss, but in truth, it is redirection, a signpost pointing you back to yourself. Carl Jung spoke often of the shadow, the hidden self we repress until it emerges through suffering. Incompatible love forces you into that shadow, making you confront the parts of you that once settled, endured, or performed for approval. It strips away the mask, and though the stripping feels like destruction, it is also rebirth. You begin to see that love, if it demands the burial of your essence, was never truly love but a shadow of it. And in that realization, the path forward opens, not as escape but as return. Rumi, the mystic poet, captured it centuries ago. Try to accept the changing seasons of your heart, even if winter feels endless, for spring waits within you. The end of an incompatible bond feels like winter, barren, cold, endless in its grief. But within you, a spring waits to bloom, a renewal that begins not in finding another, but in rediscovering the self you left behind. The pain of incompatibility is real, but so is the freedom hidden within it. It teaches you that happiness cannot be manufactured through endurance, that peace cannot be bargained through silence, that love is not the art of shrinking yourself to fit another's mold. True love is not a cage, but a mirror one that reflects you as you are, not as you pretend to be. And so, you stand at the edge of choice, to remain in a story that erases you, or to step into a truth that may terrify you, but will finally set you free. The shadow has shown you what does not belong. The task now is to walk into the light of what does. For in the end, incompatibility is not your failure. It is your teacher. It is the quiet guide reminding you that love, in its purest form, is not found in forcing two souls to fit, but in honoring the one you carry within.